We continue You Can Change the World, The Christopher Approach by James Keller, by starting Chapter 11, Influencing the World from Home. Well, now we have social media, so here I am. On a street corner of a northwestern city just over a year ago, a newsboy stood hawking his papers, one grimy fist holding up a copy of the evening edition for passers-by to see. His hoarse-voiced, solemn chant, "Get your papers here. Read all about it. Reds lose control of labor union," mingled with the roar of speeding cars and trucks and the thin clang of bells as the traffic lights changed from green to yellow, then to red, and repeated the procedure over and over again. A man passing by paused for a moment to scan the newspaper headlines. The newsboy eyed him expectantly until the man, with a faint smile, reached into his pocket, took out a coin, and dropped it in the youngster's outstretched hand. Ignoring the folded paper, which was offered him, "Keep it for yourself, son," he muttered quickly. "Read what it says about the Reds losing out in that union. It's a little over your head now, but read it anyway, and remember it. It'll show you what real Americans can do once they put their minds to it. I know. I found out the hard way." A moment later, as he hurried away, conscious of the newsboy's puzzled stare which followed him, he found himself wishing he could have explained himself a little better, especially would have liked to tell everyone about Helen, for Helen was his wife, and it was she who deserved the credit for the full streamer headlines, which shouted the message of victory for the democratic, God-given way over those who had used their liberty to try to destroy it. It hadn't looked that way at first, though. What was it she'd told him when he'd complained about the Reds taking over, and he had wanted to pull out? "You stay clear of that crowd, Walt," she said. "Don't get mixed up in their underhanded tricks. It'll only mean trouble, and the children and I don't want anything to happen to you." But that was before she'd found out that getting decent people to quit the union was just what the Reds wanted. When she finally realized they could only be defeated by having men like himself go back in and work for what was right, she'd reversed her stand. She'd persuaded him to stick it out, urging him to attend every union meeting, even though it meant the same old story of being shouted down every time he tried to do anything constructive. Then she'd come across with her second bit of advice: get others who thought as he did to follow his example. And thank God he'd done just that. It wasn't long before the rank and file of decent Joes began to prick up their ears and take notice. And as they did, the Reds had found the going that much tougher. Finally, Helen had capped her triumphs with, "Why don't you get Harry or Fred or some of your other friends to run for a place on the executive board next election?" Little dreaming, or was she, that they, in turn, would help vote him in as president of the union. The man shook his head admiringly. What a terrific sense of direction, what resourcefulness that woman had. It was more than her feminine intuition that made her see how well he and the others would succeed just by being where they could do the most good, even though they'd barely held their own at first. They'd kept on until the tide gradually swung in their favor, and finally a whole new slate of men besides himself had been elected. Men who thought America was pretty much okay. Men who didn't want a bunch of subversives plowing under everything America stood for.